Hello, this is John Majori with MajoriOnBowie.com, and I'm very excited to welcome back today Melissa P.K. Tonning-Kollwitz for a continuation of our discussion of the play she's working on called Turn and Face the Strange, which is going to be of great interest to Bowie fans. PK has more than a decade of experience as a theater professor, and in that capacity, she created her own method of teaching, voice, and text, which she calls the PK method, to fill in gaps that she observed in traditional academic settings. There's much we could talk about her career. In the first part of this interview, we really focused on the play that she's working on, Turn and Face the Strange, in which Bowie is a very pivotal character and part of the play. Today, we're going to dig in a little bit more into Bowie himself. So, PK, thank you very much for joining me again. And welcome back.
So happy to be here. Thank you, John.
So to bridge the two discussions, I want to mention that in the play, two characters, the lead character M and the narrator, are both obsessed with Bowie. And sort of we tease this in the first part of the interview. Why Bowie? Why does he and why do his words and art lend themselves to contemplation and a kind of immersive fandom?
Such a great question. I really can't think of another artist that's shared as much as he has in interviews about his artistic philosophy and process. I think he's incredibly candid and relatable in speaking about the creative risks and failures. And all, I find all of that incredibly heartening to read and to hear. And I also just think that his work has such breadth. It covers so many different genres of music and cross-pollinates them in such creative ways. And yeah, I could go on and on. I mean, Bowie fans know this. I think it's the fact that his work spans so much time, and he was such a prolific creator of art that there's just so much there. It's so rich.
Yeah, yeah. So are you obsessed with Bowie? Or if that's too strong a word, are you fascinated by Bowie?
Yeah, I think the collaborator on the project, Jason, and we've gone back and forth between, like, is she a fanatic? Does fanatic have a negative connotation?
Yeah.
Does the word aficionado feel better, or like expert, or like what's the word that like feels what it is without it feeling like kind of a crazy fan?
Yeah.
And I would say I am a Bowie aficionado at this point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, a friend of mine, like, I mean, part of this question, I think, is like, is it just Bowie, or could this be any other celebrity? And I think that,
yeah,
other than Bowie fans, obviously, that a lot of other people have that one artist that they come back to. And a colleague of mine who's a playwriting professor, Kenny Finkel, he has a podcast called All I Want to Do Is Talk About Madonna, which is his way of sharing his fandom and being an aficionado of Madonna and her work and her life. And that's exactly the kind of person that I think the main character is. She's this Bowie expert, and she's made up really of like an amalgam of all of the Bowie scholars and authors that I've interviewed for this play, alongside with my own fascination of Bowie.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking, could this be done with other musicians in particular? And in my thinking, I was sort of stipulating, well, you could do this with Dylan, right? But I was specifically wondering, could you do this with Madonna? And you just basically said that you could.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
yeah.
But I think what makes Bowie unique is how much he spoke in interviews about his process. I think a lot of artists can be a little gatekeepy about how they work, and yeah, he was just so generous with sharing different things he was trying and different approaches, and you can really see the kind of ebb and flow of influences, and how he was always really just so hungry for, what's the next thing to represent what's going on in our world right now, and how can I translate that into my art?
Yeah. He spoke a lot about how he saw himself as providing the art, but he was really throwing it to the audience to do something with it, to interpret it.
Yeah.
And I'm in a a relatable situation. And I write about David Bowie every day. And when I try to explain this to somebody who's less familiar with David Bowie, it's not an obvious explanation as to why. But I think, the extent to which there is some mystery in his lyrics and his strategies and his personas. Do you think that he's giving us a lot of material to work with on our end as opposed to just experiencing?
Do I think he's giving us a lot of material for us to be able to interpret?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think he's really, really good at posing tough questions for
Yeah.
us to then try to sort out ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In my own thinking, I think that makes him different than your stereotypical pop star who's giving us sort of an audio experience to dance to, or to just move through the next 3 minutes with. Especially since he was often cryptic, and when he would comment on what his songs were about. I'm specifically talking about his songs, but as you pointed out, he worked with many different media. But he often didn't say, he was inconsistent with his own explanations, other than saying that he threw a lot to the audience to figure it out.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
why he feels really relatable, because he's posing questions and not really giving answers.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
saying, like, I'm struggling with these questions too, aren't you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in the first part of our interview, you mentioned Bowie as sort of as a stand-in for a kind of a higher power, and in the play, the narrator of the play, not M, said that the continuum of his writing, of Bowie's writing, is a search for God and one's higher being. And I wonder if you agree with that assessment. Is, in your view, is that the thread that connects the themes of Bowie's art?
Yeah, that's actually a quote from one of these Bowie scholars. But I absolutely agree with it. I think what we can glean from his interviews, I don't know, I think he was personally seeking the answer to those questions, and he used his writing and his art to explore that.
Yeah.
So I think it's a combination of him as an artist and him as a person, of like trying to find what is our like higher purpose. Or I know he over the years, there's a real progression of how he felt about religion and spirituality and how that evolved. And so it's not surprising to me that those seem like central questions to what was underlying all of his art.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
the casual fan would be surprised to see how religious or spiritual themes enter his songs far more frequently than space aliens.
Yeah. But even that, like, you're talking about, like, if you're talking about aliens and, space, it's also like the unknown, which is also like talking about our faith or our spirituality. It's like there is a clear, for me, correlation between outer space and the unknown and feeling alien and
Yeah.
being human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, you've got my mind racing, because I'm thinking about how he himself used different symbols almost interchangeably, like you're saying, with his use of aliens and space can be swapped out with supernatural figures or spiritual figures in heaven, and then his own characters, right? They're interchangeable symbols.
They can be. Again, like he's
Yeah.
leaving it for us to interpret, which is the
Yeah.
best part.
So a lot of your treatment of Bowie, and also the lead character in the play, M, revolves around different persona. Is Bowie, you mentioned this before, your interest is in David Bowie, not David Jones,
Yeah.
right? So is David Bowie a character? And if he is, can he be played by somebody other than David Jones?
Yes. And yes.
Yeah.
I think David Bowie is, and I've seen an interview with Iman where she said, I didn't fall in love with David Bowie, I fell in love with David Jones. Yeah, I think that I'm interested in the artist, because I don't actually think that we ever get to see there's always a mask, even when he's in interviews. He's still David Bowie, the performer.
Yeah.
So unless you had a personal, right, relationship with him, you would never have seen him without that mask on. I think fans only saw him with this mask on. And yeah, I absolutely think that anybody could be playing this character. Actually,
Yeah.
my dream casting for this is not even a man. It's Jodie Comer, a female actress from the UK. And I don't think it matters who's playing with him because they're representing a manifestation of him as he lives in M's mind.
Yeah.
So that's way open.
So you reviewed every statement that's on record of him having made, right?
Tried, yeah.
Yeah.
I
And
still find new stuff. Even, I mean, sometimes I get stuck with a script and I go, okay, I have to go back to the database, or I should put on some music and see if I hear something differently. And I'm always finding new stuff. So I think it will be kind of a lifelong, longer than the life of this play, a lifelong pursuit of, yeah, trying to know all the things that he has ever been recorded saying.
have you found him suggesting that he has cast off his previous persona and this is the real Bowie on different occasions, and that the character saying this is the real me isn't in fact different?
Yeah, it feels like one of those like Russian dolls, right?
Yeah.
Like you take off the one external persona and there's another one underneath it. It's like,
Yeah.
how do you know what's really David Jones? And that's the thing, is like, that's the point I was trying to make. I don't actually think that we'll ever have seen David Jones.
Yeah. It was long after he was actually doing this, but the very sort of approachable, friendly persona that he projected in the late 90s and the early 2000s, it seemed at that point that he's like, okay, act is done. This is who I really am. But then when he reemerged after his sort of decade in solitude as this isn't my term, a remystified figure, it was pretty evident that accessible Bowie wasn't the real guy either. So
Yeah, I think there's something that's always seemed otherworldly about him. And there's so many people that have written about that, that he takes on a kind of, yeah, that somehow we imbue him, this extra spiritual guide kind of thing, onto him, which
yeah,
I don't know if that's to do with his personas or his evolution, or yeah, there's so many things to consider. This
yeah,
idea that he's never that we're never seeing the real him. I don't know.
yeah. Has Bowie appeared in your dreams, your actual dreams?
No, he hasn't appeared in my dreams, although I do dream about the play and often
Mm.
can solve things I'm stuck on in my dreams. And the only kind of woo-woo thing I think I've done with this play is write a letter to him.
Yeah,
I wrote him a letter asking him if it would be okay that I use his words and okay that I use his music to tell my story. And I carry it in my pocket. And that's just until I get the performance rights for the music. It's just me trying to like will into the universe that Bowie would approve of how I'm using his words. And yeah, there's a couple other plays that exist, I think, that have Bowie characters in them, but the playwrights use, like, they put words in his mouth, like they make him say other things. And
right.
I never ever wanted to do that. I said I only wanted to ever, if this main character is obsessed with Bowie, then what would live in her subconscious is all of the quotes and lyrics and songs and images.
Yeah, yeah. So we didn't use this term, but to some extent, because his words and his music are, um, they're kind of pliable. I have often thought that he was relativistic, but he also expresses a sense that we're responsible for the outcomes of our own decisions and actions. So combined, are we responsible for our own reality, which is a question I think is relevant to the play. Your Bowie says as much. Your version of Bowie, in from what I've read of the play, is that an overarching message here, or am I getting this totally wrong?
No, I think you're onto something, because this idea that we're responsible for our own reality is very much in line with like the quotes that I have from him. And it also really lines up with Jason's coaching principles. And one of those principles is that we are the only ones who are 100% responsible for ourselves. And the quote about, that first quote at the David Bowie's exhibit that like really captured me is the one about meaning not necessarily being implied by the author, that there is no authoritative voice, that there are only multiple readings. I feel like that cracks everything wide open, because then you understand that there's no point in pursuing perfection. There's no point in trying to please other people. We should celebrate, the diversity in people's responses to art because it's so subjective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So PK, thank you very much. I'm going to ask you just a couple more questions, and I feel like I could talk to you all day. And I hope if you don't run screaming from this interview, when you're ready to tell us that the play is going to launch, I would really, if it works for you, I'd really be delighted to have you back.
I would love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also think it would be really fun, because you and I both have interviewed people about Bowie,
Yeah.
to flip the script and interview the interviewer. So maybe we can arrange that before the end of the year, because I would love to put you on the hot seat and ask you all the questions about Bowie too.
Deal. So let me ask you a couple closing questions, and I think this one is sort of the overarching question of what we've been discussing. Do you distinguish between Bowie and his art? Does his art or do his words exist outside the person?
Yeah. So I feel like I touched on this a little bit
Yeah.
earlier, but I think David Bowie is the artist and David Jones is the person. And I don't know and will never know David Jones, and fans will never get the chance to see him without that mask on. So even
Yeah.
in interviews, it's still David Bowie, not really David Jones. So this David Bowie manifestation, this character in this play, represents the artist and not the person. And I think that's how he lives in all of us.
Yeah. I asked that to sort of sum up some of what we've been talking about, and I really have to agree with you. And I see something like what you're doing, and I also see I have this feature on the blog which is called Cover of the Week, where I find a cover that's been posted on YouTube over the past week, so it's always a new one, a Bowie song, and to me, it's artists such as yourself or the people that do the covers are keeping Bowie alive, right? That not David Jones, he's not alive, but what you're doing is new art, and that's part of the reason why I find what you're doing to be so exciting. So I'm going to close this interview with the question that, well, I mean, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Did you want to comment on
No,
it?
I was just saying thank you.
Yeah. But I want to close asking a question that I ask everybody. And everybody says the same thing, which is, if you ask me tomorrow, I'll give you a different answer. So let's just stipulate that. But what is your favorite Bowie song and the favorite Bowie album?
You saved the hardest question for last, right? It's true. I think people go through phases. I imagine a lot of people go through phases. And luckily, like I said, his discography, right? The entire breadth of his work is so diverse, and it spans decades and it spans music genres. And I just feel like there's something for everybody.
Yeah.
I really love the Berlin trilogy. That might be like a really hipster answer for this, but I really, really love the Berlin trilogy. But I think like Desert Island Pick, like one album only forever, I think I have to agree with you and say it's Scary Monsters.
Yeah, that's my favorite.
Yeah. I could probably listen to Ashes on repeat forever.
Yeah.
There's so many good tracks on that.
It's almost like
a good album as a whole. I think that's why I
Yeah.
have to choose Scary Monsters. Yeah.
It's almost like the more interesting question is, what's your second favorite album, right?
Oh God, that's even harder. Yeah. What favorite song? I
Yeah.
think this also might be a little bit of a, I don't know, Bowie elitist answer, but he did an acoustic version of Dead Man Walking.
Yeah.
Reeves Gabrel in '97 on Conan. And that is hands down my favorites. But I also love Time from Aladdin Sane. I love 5 Years from Rise and Fall. I love Word on a Wing from Station to Station. I love Rebel Rebel from Diamond Dogs. Like I could go on and on and on.
It's a real diversity.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you, PK. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for what you're doing. It's really exciting. I'm looking forward to eventually seeing the play.
Yeah, my pleasure, John. Thank you so much for having me. This is a really fun chat. Again, we probably could be here for hours.
Yeah, well, let's keep in touch and let's do it again.
Yes, please. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.